Hello, this is Mike, and welcome to another episode of Urban Legends and Mythology, your home for the bizarre, the macabre, and all the things that go bump in the night. So today I'm going to start off with a story, and this is actually another personal story. It's about the time I visited Mexico. So me and some other guys, we were down in Sonora, and we were actually working on a ranch. And while this ranch mostly dealt with cattle, they did have a large number of sheep as well. And life working on a ranch is pretty routine. You get up in the morning, you feed the animals, you have breakfast, you muck out some stalls, you try to figure out why your buddy keeps looking at that one sheep in that weird way, but you don't think much of it. You tend to the livestock and you just perform whatever work needs to be done that day. A lot of it's just very general, mundane tasks. However, one morning we woke up and we noticed something strange. So this was an early morning. This was like 4:35 a.m. And we head on over to one of the sheep pens to basically give them their morning food. And all of a sudden we notice something strange. Two of the sheep are just laying there near the side of the pen, not moving. And upon further investigation, we realize that both of these sheep are dead. And it's kind of odd because it didn't look like there was any trauma induced. There wasn't any signs of like a coyote attack or anything. So we go to the pen and we drag these sheep out to figure out what the hell killed them, because the first thing in our mind is maybe it's a disease. And the last thing we want is some kind of illness or disease spreading to the rest of the herd. So we drag them out and we kind of quarantine them in just this little shed that was nearby. And we call in Bones. Bones is kind of the local vet in the area. Yeah, we basically tell him we have these sheep and they just died and we can't figure out the reason. There's no trauma. They weren't attacked. We don't know what's going on. Can you investigate this? Do an autopsy or something? And he says, don't worry, I'll come right over. So about an hour later, he comes over and he's in this little shed doing this investigation, and it doesn't take him long to figure out what happened. He says that these sheep had been drained of blood completely. And we're confused. We're like, how is that possible? Were they attacked by something? Was it something parasitic? What's going on? And Bones, he simply just points to these 3 puncture wounds in the chest of the sheep that we hadn't noticed. And our first thought was, what could have caused these injuries? And old Bones, he just kind of looks at us like we're idiots. And he just plainly says, well, it looks like you have a Chupacabra on your hands. And that is the story we are getting into today. We are discussing the myth, the legend of the Chupacabra. And not only is it a fun word to say, it is actually one of my favorite cryptids, right up there with the jackalope. And by the way, yes, that is totally a true story. I have led a very fascinating life. So let's get into the story of the Chupacabra, what he is, where he comes from, and some hypotheses on what he could possibly be. So as always, I'm going to start off with a sip of this delicious cerveza, and we're going to start right at the beginning. So first and foremost, we have to ask ourselves, what is a Chupacabra? And the term Chupacabra actually comes from an amalgam of 2 Spanish words, so chupa or sucks and cabras or goats. So literally it's sucks goats or goat sucker. And this name actually has an origin point. It comes from 1995 when a Puerto Rican comedian by the name of Silvero Perez came up with it while commenting on these recent attacks that happened with a local radio DJ. And overall, Chupacabra is a very late entry into the cryptid world. Even younger than the Mothman, accounts of Chupacabra don't even show up until 1995. Of course, the whole story really starts in 1975 because while he wasn't called Chupacabra back then, in 1975 an incident did happen in Puerto Rico, and I'll get into that right now. So in 1975, in the small Puerto Rican town of Moca, a series of animal attacks took place. And the series of livestock killings was very peculiar because these animals had been drained of blood and they would find small circular incisions on these animals. And these attacks become attributed to El Vampiro de Moca, or in English, the Vampire of Moca. Now, this series of animal slaughters didn't have a creature identified or anything attached to it. They were just bizarres. But it was similar to a bunch of other livestock killings that were happening around the island of Puerto Rico. And these attacks bear a strikingly similar appearance to the later attacks, which were attributed to the Chupacabra. Hell, they were exactly the same. It's only in March of 1995, after a series of sheep attacks, when Chupacabra Chupacabra really becomes the main focus of these attacks. So in March of 1995, 8 sheep were found dead on this farm, and each was found with puncture wounds in their chest and completely drained of blood. So a few months after these initial attacks, in the town of Canavanes, a woman named Madeline Tonantino became one of the first eyewitnesses to ever see the Chupacabra. And this was during like the height of his attacks. In August of 1995, he had killed as many as 150 farm animals and sucked them dry. And it wasn't just goats that were the victims of Chupacabra, it was also sheep, cows, chickens, all captured and killed in this same fashion. But it's from Tolentino where we get the first real eyewitness description of what Chupacabra looks like, and she explained it as the following. So essentially, she described it as a reptile-like creature with leathery or scaly greenish-gray skin and sharp spines or quills running down its back. She described it as being somewhere between 3 to 4 feet tall, or 0.9 to 1.2 meters for you out there in not America, and that it stood on its hind legs and hopped in a similar fashion to that of a kangaroo. So from this description, it sounds kind of like an alien, lizard, kangaroo, porcupine hybrid, which actually sounds pretty awesome. And her description of Chupacabra is kind of the primary description we see of him today when he's depicted in art or media. And of course, this blows up in the media and it becomes like the talk of the town, and people all over Puerto Rico are now interested in this story. However, it gets crazier because shortly afterwards, similar sightings of Chupacabra and similar animal deaths start appearing all over the Americas. So reports of this creature start coming out in Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Peru, and the United States. And there's even been sightings as far north as Maine. However, the depictions of the Chupacabra which were coming out of these areas were vastly different. They looked more like hairless dogs, and they tend to take on more of like a mangy coyote appearance. But through all of this, the general reports of how these farm animals were being killed were generally the same. These creatures were drained of blood, so basically it's death by vampirism. And vampirism is actually a very common practice amongst many creatures in nature as a form of feeding. So vampire bats, certain species of spiders, certain species of eels and fish, and infamously leeches. They're all creatures that feed on kind of the proteins in our blood. However, these are all very small animals. Chupacabra is, 3 to 4 feet tall, so he's more like a vampire type cryptid, more in line with a modern mainstream vampire. And on a side note, future episodes about vampires are coming. It has been a long requested topic, and I'm finally getting around to it. But it's not too crazy to think that vampire folklore would get mixed up with the folklore of Chupacabra, because that's usually a go-to when it comes to unexplained deaths, especially when there's puncture wounds or a small incision or something. And the thing is, since Chupacabra is so big, yeah, it would be natural that he would have to vampirize hundreds of different animals at a time. But the problem with that is it's probably one of the most least efficient ways to feed yourself when you're an anthropomorphic 3 to foot tall creature. It's not genetically advantageous at all. However, there is speculation that Chupacabra isn't natural in origin. There is speculation that it's man-made, and that takes us to Chile. So in Chile, there had been purported animal attacks and sightings of these creatures. And then in this area around the Atacama Desert, all of a sudden this big military presence show up, and it's kind of odd. What's the military doing out in the middle of this sparse desert? Well, it turned out there was this facility there, and this facility was somewhat associated with NASA here in the United States. And it was believed that at this laboratory or whatever, they were performing these genetic DNA splicing experiments in order to create some hybrid creatures that would be adapted to living in space or on other planets. And it said that these soldiers were here just to contain the area in case these creatures ever decided to get out. However, due to some kind of breach, these creatures did get out, and a vast majority of them stayed in the South American continent and then headed up to Central America through Mexico and even to southwestern America America and even to Maine. And it's believed that one Chupacabra, a different type of hybrid, probably hitched a ride on a boat or I don't know, in the wheel well of a 747 or something and made his way to Puerto Rico. And that became the goat sucker that we know today. Now that's a really fun story and I like it because it has all the tropes of an awesome urban legend. You know, government cover-ups, crazy mad science, vampiric creatures escaping into the world. It has it all. It's awesome. But sadly, the case of the Chupacabra is a cryptid where everything about it can be debunked. And it actually has been debunked scientifically, which is sad because he is my favorite cryptid. But I wouldn't be doing my job if we didn't get into the real history of the Chupacabra and how everything about the urban legend came to be. So in this segment, we'll get into that. So to be perfectly honest, we really don't know why some livestock ends up just mysteriously dead. Sometimes a sheep or a goat just dies and you can't really find any evidence of it. Sometimes a cow gets mutilated and you can't really figure out if it was coyotes or humans or aliens or what. And Chupacabra is one of these cases, especially when it comes to Puerto Rico, because we did have a series of mysterious animal deaths. And it's not the farmers or ranchers doing it. Remember, these animals are these farmers and ranchers' livelihoods. The last thing they want for these animals is for them to die under mysterious circumstances that makes them valueless. So the early 1975 case of the El Vampiro de Mocha, the Mocha vampire, a lot of people believe that those killings were actually committed by a satanic cult that was in the area, who are probably doing this for some weird blood sacrifice ritual that they concocted in one of their mother's basements or something. In the 1995 killings, those were highly exaggerated, as well as the subsequent killings from around the Americas. And there was actually a guy who spent like 5 years investigating this with a team of like doctors from various colleges. His name was Benjamin Radford, and in 2011 he wrote a book called Tracking the Chupacabra, and he kind of conclusively debunks everything. So to start off, these animal killings in Puerto Rico, there were over 300 reported victims of the Chupacabra, and autopsies of these animals found conclusively that they had not been bled dry. Now, these autopsies were done by a man named Dr. David Morales, who was a Puerto Rican veterinarian with the Department of Agriculture, and he didn't find a single animal that was drained of blood. And it was further proven that many of these attacks were the cause of various animal attacks, most notably coyote, and that was due to DNA evidence found on the bodies of these animals. And I just know this personally about coyotes because I used to live on a property that had a pack of them. They don't always eat their prey when they kill it right then and there. Sometimes they'll kill their prey and then they'll come back later to feed on it. So you can come across a dead animal and see very little signs of attack. And when you've lived amongst them as long as I have, you just know that it was a coyote that did it. And this was corroborating with a lot of finds in the Americas. They were finding that these were coyote attacks. And a lot of these coyotes were infected with what's essentially mange. This is a disease that can cause like a thick skin buildup because they're constantly digging at their skin, and hair loss, and it makes them look almost alien-like. And a lot of people in places like Mexico will call these mangy coyotes Chupacabra simply because they do attack their livestock, especially during dry seasons and periods of drought where their normal prey is long gone and they start going after farm animals, mostly out of desperation and because farm animals are generally slow and kind of weak and dumb, especially during periods of drought, so they're easy pickings. So a lot of these attacks do end up just being debunked as coyote attacks, which were happening during periods of drought in which the coyotes are more desperate and more bold. Now, unfortunately, our best eyewitness account of a Chupacabra can also be easily debunked. So Madeline Totolino, her description of the creature is nearly identical to the alien creature in the film Species. Now, Totolino, she said that she had seen this film a few weeks prior to seeing the Chupacabra and describing him to the media. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that media outlet was UFO Digest, so big surprise. But she also said that she saw this film on television and thought that what she was seeing was actually happening in real time in Puerto Rico. So essentially, this lady sees a horror film, believes it's real, and then reports to the media that, hey, I saw the Chupacabra and he looks like this. Now, aside from that, I really don't know much or anything about this lady, and I don't like to throw labels around, but I'm pretty sure that she probably has a screw loose. However, her depiction of Chupacabra has made him a pop culture icon, so maybe she knew what she was doing. Because now Chupacabra and that image of Chupacabra is ingrained in urban legend, and that image shows up on like coffee mugs and t-shirts and keychains and posters and whatever you want. I mean, Chupacabra is basically an industry like the Jackrabbit or Bigfoot, and personally I think that's pretty awesome. And what I think is even more amazing about it is that it shows that even in today's world, I mean, this was the 90s, so last 30 years, that urban legends and cryptids and mythology is still out there. It's still with us, and it's something that will never go away, and I just think that is totally awesome. But to be honest, that's all I really have to say about Chupacabra. So once again, this is Mike. I thank you for listening. I know this was a really short episode, but hey, sometimes my episodes are short. What can you do? Not everything can be an hour-long feature-length documentary that takes multiple recording sessions and hours in the research and editing departments, which is literally just me sitting here in this apartment at this computer and at the bar reading. But maybe someday with enough support and enough growth that will change. And if you would like to help out or be a part of that growth, you can always reach out to me. You can always share my links. Go find the social medias. They're all there. Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Even that Threads thing. I don't do TikTok or video stuff because I don't have an iPhone, and even though Samsung phones are miles ahead of iPhone when it comes to technology, their cameras are generally kind of lame. But if someone wants to send me an older model iPhone that they're not using anymore that still has great cameras, go ahead and reach out to me. I'll take it. Hell, this computer that I'm doing this on was actually donated by a listener. You can also support this podcast monetarily. There's that link in the description of every episode. Support this podcast. You can go there. There are 3 tiers. You can support it. And if you don't want to do that, if you don't want your credit card information outlined, reach out to me. I'll give you like my Cash App or something. Also, in the future, I will be doing some cross-promotional stuff with other small makers, other small podcasters, other small businesses and artists in my town. So you might see something in the form of like an informal ad for something like that. Check those people out as well, because I know they would love your support just as much as I would. But I'm rambling now. I'm going to wrap this up. So once again, I thank you for listening, and I will see you guys in the next episode.